Hello and welcome to the Mars Day Meetup. It is March 7th, 2023. We are starting at exactly 9 o'clock a.m. I'm going to I leave space for anybody to come on live. Um, Anyone that's new here watching the replay, welcome. Thank you for joining us. These meetup places are really um, just a place for me to get with all of you. One, be live. So if anybody likes the live interaction, it's available. Question if you have stuff that you want to show up with, that you want me to I don't want to get into like chart readings necessarily, but I can look at specific charts when we're here. So it's really a time for me to ramble about the astrology of the week ahead. That's the main point, is so that we can go into the week, feeling a little bit prepared, right? Astrology is like the weather, right? We watch the weather to know if we need to, and I use astrology the same way, like just because I'm not specifically feeling something doesn't mean that the people around me, like a transit, doesn't mean that the people around me aren't feeling it. So I like to have an idea of what's happening cosmically. And I like to share that with you because astrology is a lot to do. And, I get questions all the time from people that are like, I know this is a stupid question, or asking or something like that. And I need to be so clear around the fact that like astrology is a lot. It's a lot. It's way more than sun signs. It's way more than what we read online. Um, astrology is a lot. And so I think it's important to remember that when you're asking questions about astrology and um when you're unsure about astrology, that's very normal, right? Like when we look at transits as that's after multiple years of learning the basics of the planets and the signs and the modalities. So when you're asking questions, please don't feel silly or dumb or stupid. You're not supposed to know all of these things, right? Astrology is very, very, very deep and layered, and there's a ton of different like schools and branches, so it can get very overwhelming. So I guess my point in that was just a reminder that you're allowed to ask. That's for and of why I'm building this container and putting so much time into the foundation of what I want it to look and feel like, is because I believe that astrology is going to get more mainstream. Like, we're seeing TV shows with astrology in it. We're seeing, a lot more talk about astrology. And what happens is then there's a lot more questions. And so my hope is that this space is a place where people can come, people that I can come to and say, hey, I saw this. I have a question about it. Or, hey, I saw this. Can you help break it down for me? Because a lot of people are putting out astrology, self included, that isn't beginner astrology, but because there's so much accessibility to like generalized astrology, which I call pop astrology, it can just become a lot. So my point is, feel free to come here to ask questions, ask questions on any of the posts that I post on, and I can kind of bridge those gaps of where you're seeing something and not really understanding it. And sometimes it's just that you're just not at that point to really get the nuance of whatever technique is being used, and that's okay. That's okay. Part of the fun about using astrology is learning and understanding it and witnessing it. And when we get so bogged down on learning it and knowing it, it takes some of the fun out, I feel like. Anyway, ask your questions. You're not silly, you're not stupid, you're not supposed to know these things. We don't teach astrology in school or anywhere. So it's totally okay. And normally you're not going to be the only one that has that question. Okay. So that's my beginning spiel of thank you for being here. Thank you for asking your questions. I appreciate it all. Yeah, and I'm happy to be here. This week is a big week. So as I prepare, I still haven't done like the to chatting about questions. Um, so I'm gonna take a second to smoke, breathe, and then I'll come back to set the intention. Feel free to do anything you feel like you need to do to prepare to receive any messages that come with you today, or just hang for a moment while I pause and medicate. All right. So as always, welcome to the Mars Day Meetup. Mars Days are Tuesdays that are ruled by the planet of Mars. And so in the space, I always invite you to tap into your personal Mars natal placement. And the Mars planet on your chart looks like a circle with an arrow shooting out. So you can find it in your own personal natal chart. I always connect with mine. My Mars is in Taurus, so I do things that make me feel aligned with that, right? So I do my herbal medicinal smoke in the morning. I have my tea, my water, my beverages that have my incense. I have my favorite candles. So Taurusy things for me, right? Because that's where my Mars is. But I invite you to lean into your Mars each week to connect with your Mars in a new way, or figure out, if you want to, if you're into that. If not, it's totally fine. We can just chat about astrology. So let's do that. The outline today, we're gonna just kind of check in, leave space for anybody that's here live or wants to pop into the comment replay with a check-in on what you've been moving through, what's come up for you. We're coming off of yesterday's Sun sextile to Uranus. We're still feeling it today with the full moon. But last week we had all those conjunction junctions. We got the World card, which was about endings and beginnings and culminations of things, changes in phases of life. And so if you had any of that stuff come up that you want to share, free to, and like link back to what we were doing last week, what we're coming into the space today with, feel free to do so. Personally, last week, that I was coming in a little bit hectic, moving through a lot of stuff. I'm feeling a lot more grounded this week. I made some really hard decisions last week around relationships and how to honor myself and align with what I truly value. Things, it's difficult when things come to an end. And I'll share a little piece of what's happening for me personally. So I've been moving through, my mother and I have a very intricate and tangled kind of emotional, energetic connection. It's very different than the connections that my mom has with her other two children, and that I have with many other people. And it's very, I won't get into the details of it, but I had to make a really hard decision last week where I chose myself. And I chose to recognize that, so Virgo full moon today, right? So as we talk about all of this energy, the full moon is the culmination of the emotional process. So today, there may be emotions that come up that aren't related to anything that's happening today, right? But it may just be that's what happens. Tension brings things forward. But for me, it's also tied into, my mom's a Virgo sun, my South Node is Virgo, and on and on and on, but I won't get into the weeds. But, I love my mother to death and I want her to be well. But the way that she wasn't able to see me, support me, understand me through my life, right? So back to what I was going to say about the full moon. Virgo full moons sometimes will bring up where I've tried it this way, I've tried it that way, I've tried it this way, I've tried it that way, right? Virgo is very much about figuring things out, getting things to work, And Virgo is also about using discernment about where things are not working and where I have tried all of my avenues, all of the tools that are in my toolkit, and I'm in a place where, right, there has to be some kind of shift. And so I was feeling that, and I moved through that, and it was shitty, right? Like, I had my birthday on Friday, and it was the first birthday of my life that I've not talked to my mother, and like, woe is me, like, some people don't have mothers. I get it. I get it. Listen, I'm not here for that. I'm just here for the playing out of the process, right? And so my point is that there may be things that are coming up that you're having to move, or maybe not. Maybe this stuff isn't hitting any of your birth chart. And that's great too. Like, we don't get hit by every single one. But so anyway, that those conjunctions last week allowed me to have a conversation that allowed me to then recognize that this pattern is at an end. So whatever that phase of our relationship looks like, it's done, it's over. The next phase will look entirely different. And it's taken me years to get to the point where it feels good for me. You know, like, it's sad, it's awful, and I feel very aligned in what I have done and how I have shown up for myself and for her and for the rest of the people that are in our family around that dynamic shift. I feel very good about how I've moved through it. And that's what I lean into, right? Like, Venus conjunct Chiron on Friday, which was the day of my actual birthday. And, you know, I was surrounded by people who wanted to celebrate me. So although I had this huge wound Chiron, having to do with my Chiron wound is very much tied to my mother and the nurturing and et cetera, et cetera. And I was in the space where I could lean into other people who wanted to show me love and wanted to celebrate me and can see me truly. And so anyway, there's a lot more that I could say there, but I invite you, if you have anything that's coming up for you, I would love to hear about it. If you have any questions, I'm always open to share more about my process, but I don't like here. But we're all moving through things, and I am hoping that as these shifts are happening through March, you're able to see the progress that you've made over the last 3 years, over the last 20 years, because we have Saturn moving out of Aquarius. It's out of Aquarius. Saturn is in Pisces, honey. Hello. So Saturn moved into Pisces about 25 30 minutes ago, something like that, 40 minutes ago. But it's been in Aquarius since March 2020. So the invitation, when outer planets that move so slowly move from one place to another, it's to consider and honor and reflect around what you have learned while that planet was in that sign, in that part of your chart, right? So as Saturn was in Aquarius, I learned in my second house, I learned self-worth. I learned about my values, what I value, and how I want to align with them. And this walk that walk. If that's what I value, and if I honor my truth and being seen and being recognized for who I am, then I need to treat myself that way. And so a couple weeks ago, and we'll get into this more when we talk about the details of the astrology, but a couple Mars days ago, we talked about, somebody had asked what my Saturn in Aquarius story was, and I went through that. And then I invited you all to kind of that same problem, what Saturn has been doing since March 2020 in your Aquarius house of your chart. If you haven't done that, it's still a great week to do it. Like, you can still tap into what lessons has Saturn taught you. That's what Saturn does. Saturn is the teacher, the mentor. And it's not always fun or easy, right? Saturn's also like the dictator and the authority. So it's not always fun. But the Saturn that I most like to work with is the grandmother figure, the crone, who has the wisdom and the knowledge to help move you through really difficult times. And so considering what that has looked like for you and any lessons or guidance that Saturn may be leaving for you as it leaves Aquarius and moves into your Pisces house. So we'll get into more of that later, but that all ties into that story for me as well. So blah, 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 blah. But I'm feeling much more grounded than last week, much more aligned last week. And my hope all of you, that's the point of what I was saying, is that as these planets start to shift, right? Saturn is now off of the anaretic degree of 29 degrees. It's into Pisces, still the 0-degree anaretic degree of Pisces, but there's a shift, there's movement. Pluto is going to do the same thing. Mars will then do the same thing at the end of the month. So I hope that as these shifts happen, you're able to settle into what you've learned, how far you've come. And even if it doesn't feel safe and secure now, hope that you're able to see and lean into and resource yourself around the ways in which you're coming more into alignment. The thing about doing that work is that often it's very dark before we get into the alignment. And so if you're feeling that, I'm always here to witness, to listen, to hold space, to help support you in any way that you can, because it's heavy at the end of the day. When endings and beginning, and it's hard, even if it's want to move on from, there's still ties there that can make it a little bit sad, a little bit bittersweet, et cetera, et cetera. So holding space for all of the spectrum of emotions that can come when we have so many planets and so much movement happening in the cosmos. Okay, pause. So the check-in, there it is. There's mine. I'll leave space for anybody that wants to share. Please feel free to do so in the comments here live, or send me a message if that's more comfortable, and we can get into it. So the overview, so I'm going to pause here in a moment, and then we're going to do like overview of the week ahead, like the highlights, and then any questions or shares that come up with that will be welcomed, and then we'll get into the actual astrology, and like we'll go through the charts, etc. And then any questions that come up with that, and then we'll do tarot to end it, and bada boom, bada bing, we're on our week. All right, so let me take a drink. Okay. So this week is a banger. Today we have the full moon in Virgo. The full moon in Virgo, I mean, any full moon is a culmination of our emotional process. The full moons happen every 28 days as a way to come to a culmination, come to an illumination, to turn the cycle. When I think of the full moon, I think of like we're at the peak, right? It's full, and at that point it starts to over, and we start to move into the next phase. But that full moon is like that tension we're holding so much. Something has to be released. Something has to be, like there has to be some kind of pop in that tension. And the moon is our emotions. It's our internal feelings. It's the way that we it's the way that we nurture ourselves. It's also the way that we feel when we're alone. It's often our moon that we feel, right? Sun is what we exude outward. It's our identity. Mars is our ego, our will, etc. But the moon, it's our internal world. It is our most childlike self, right? It's what we know in our bones. It's the way that we move through instinctually. And the full moon will often bring up stuff that ties into that. That's happening. That happened. It already peaked. My husband and I trying to in sync in bed, so no worries. Hey, full moon. So full moon this morning happened, and then that was at 7:40 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, at 16 degrees of Virgo, the sun at Pisces. And then 50 minutes later at like 8:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Saturn moved into Pisces. So Saturn is now in Pisces. So this is a very general to say. Congratulations to the Saturn in Aquarius folks for graduating your Saturn return, and welcome to the Saturn in Pisces folks to your Saturn return. That's a very general statement, because depending on where your Saturn is, your return might not be over if it's in Aquarius, and it might not start if you're in Pisces, but we'll get into the weeds later. Okay, but that's happening today. So we're feeling those shifts, bada boom. And then we have some like moon stuff happening throughout the week, but the main hits are then we move to the 11th over the weekend. We have the moon in Scorpio. We have Venus in a sextile to Mars. So this is creative, this is playful, this is social. We have Mercury in a sextile to Uranus. So two sextiles, which is flowing creative energy. Mercury and Uranus in a sextile is quick thinking, it's chatty, it's social, it's fun, it's spontaneous, it's yeah, we'll get into more of it later. But and then on that same day, so on the 11th, we have 3 transits that are overlapping. So we have those 2 sextiles, and then we also have a conjunction with Jupiter and Chiron that pulls back to some of those Chiron wounds and some of the Venus Jupiter stuff that was happening last week in Aries. So that happens on the 11th, and we'll get into it more when we pull up the chart. And then that's pretty much the main hits of the week. And then we move into next week, which we'll talk about on next Mars Day, but it's a shit show. So we'll talk a little bit about it. But that's the week. That's the week highlights. We have today is a big day. And then the 11th, we have a fun day. I mean, it's fun with those sextiles on the 11th. Chiron involved, so maybe a little ouchy, but we'll get into it. Okay, so that's the highlight, not the details, just the highlights. So I did have a question from a patron. Let me look for it really quickly. I'll find it if need be. All right, well, let's get into it. Let's get into the Virgo full moon first. It's still very active and very able to be utilized. Oh, thank you, May. Checking into the chat, and May had said, I'm glad you're choosing you even when it's hard. It is hard, and thank you very much. I love your high energy today. You're helping me with good. I'm so happy to have you. All right, so this is the current chart. Hey, there's Saturn and Pisces, cutesy. We'll come back to it. Let's look at the full moon chart first. All right, so we have the full moon, and there's a lot of stuff here to go through. So let's just break it down. So this moon, we're going to be all week long as we kind of dwindle down. So we get to the full moon, which is the culmination. And sometimes during a full moon, there will be an illumination of what needs to be let go of. There may be some kind of culmination of a phase of a situation. It's the peak of the emotional cycle or the situation at hand, the culmination, the completion, etc. Anytime there's a full moon, there's tension between 2 parts of the chart, whatever parts are opposite of each other, where the sun and the moon are at the time. That's what makes a full moon. So this full moon, you can see, has sun in Pisces at 16 degrees, 40 minutes, and right across has the Virgo moon at 16 degrees and 40 minutes. So you're going to be feeling this specifically if you're mid degree, like 10 degrees to 20 degrees, mutable signs. Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius. So if you have placement within that, you're going to be feeling this moon most potently. But we all feel it in different ways. So you can look at your Virgo Pisces axis in your chart. But you can also look at it just generally. So Virgo, where the moon is, it's about our physical health. Virgo is about the health and the habits that we do on a daily basis that make for our health. Right? So it's what I do and what my habits are. Pisces is the spiritual side of that, spiritual health. How what my soul needs, right? That's very much Pisces. So there's this tension between the physical health and the spiritual health and what we do on a daily basis to ensure that those things are working for us in the way that we want them to. Yeah, so like the daily habits that support or harm our health in a holistic sense, right? So there can be some one thing that we aspects part of the chart is this thick blue line. So the thicker the lines on these charts, the closer the aspect. So the more potent the aspect. And I'll show you later. We'll skip through the end of this week and you can see those change in a really cool way. But we have this thick-ish blue line. So this is that sun sextile to Uranus that we already mentioned that we were feeling exact last week. But this sextile is creative, it's spontaneous, it's fun. And if able to, Uranus is also at the point of Thales, which I've talked about the point of Thales a couple times on here, but this is when a planet, so let me get my draw stuff out really quickly. All right, so we have the sun and the moon, and they're in an opposition. So when you have planets or points in an opposition, and then you have another planet sextile and trine to another one, that planet, Uranus in this case, is at the point of Thales. It's a release point. It's like a release valve in the tension of the opposition. And so we have the opposition of the sun and the moon in Pisces and Virgo, and then the release point for that tension is Uranus in Taurus, which can indicate that we can release some of the tension of this full moon by trying being open to a shift in perspective. That's one of the things that I think could be key under this full moon, is recognizing where we've been fixed in our perspective and in our beliefs. And is there a way that we can be open, right? Uranus brings us intuitive downloads, quick ones, fast changes and shifts in perspective. Is there a way that we can be open to receiving any kind of shift or download, shift in perspective that will allow us to move through what to ahead, right? So that's if this moon is specifically lighting up something in your chart to move through, right? That can be a way. Uranus is shocking and it's jolting, but it also just likes to try new things, right? Uranus is also the liberator. So anytime Uranus is at the point of Thales in tension, it's always, always, always important to act from right? That's what Uranus wants to do. And it's really important to move through, tension points with Uranus at the point of Thales in a way that's really aligned for, the liberation of all. So that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about. The next thing that I want to talk about with this moon is the importance of endings and beginnings. So we already talked about that. That started last week with the conjunctions. It's continuing this with moon, and all because we still have Pluto and Saturn both at 29 degrees. Well, Saturn's not anymore because it's already moved, but with this full moon, it was still there. So it was still capturing those final moments of Saturn in Aquarius. So I'll be interested to see what comes out in the news over the next few days, because this can really indicate like this is the last moment. There are 60 minutes in each sign. Saturn is at 59 minutes, 29 degrees and 59 minutes. That is the very last minute, the last moment that Saturn is in Aquarius. And so whatever comes out at the culmination of this full moon collectively can kind of be a wrap up to what Saturn was doing in Aquarius. It can also give us an idea of what Saturn is passing off to Pluto, that Pluto will then deal with while it's so again, I'm interested in just noting what happens collectively over this next week, and what comes out around the news and the collective. Aquarius is the future. It is also the collective. And so just interested to see what happens. But you can also do that in your own life, right? You can recognize what's coming up for you around this time. What is Saturn? So again, back to that conversation about what your Saturn and Aquarius story was. And so as Saturn moves, what is getting the handoff from Saturn around? What is Saturn then coming in to bring power to or to destruct, right? Can go either way. Pluto can do a lot of stuff, right? And so I don't want to get into the weeds with it specifically. I just think it's important to notice what comes out around this full moon, as it can really indicate what is being handed off to Pluto to deal with for the next 20 years in some way or another. Let me just check my notes. Oh, yeah, the other cool thing is, so Saturn did this cool shift. So I don't know if you remember last new moon, it was a new moon in Pisces, and right after the new moon in Pisces, Venus moved into Aries, like right after. It was at the 29th degree, took the message from the new moon and went into Aries. Saturn did that this lunation. Pluto does that. What this is indicating is this is 3 different lunations at early degrees of the sign, which indicates new beginnings, but planets directly at the 29th anaretic degree, indicating endings, right? So there's all of these different beginnings, endings, shifting happening this month. And this is just more of that process. So it's Saturn this time, the Aries, it's Pluto that will leave. It'll be at the 29th degree still for the Aries new moon, and then it will dip down into Aquarius for the first of its back and forth transitions. So I just thought that was really cool and just something to note about the callbacks. Okay, so still plenty of time. If you have no clue what your Saturn story is, still plenty of time to figure it out, and you don't have to. That's the good thing. You never have to do any of that stuff. You'll still be okay. So I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything on my specific notes. Oh, I did want to speak to this. I'm not sure which astrologer I heard talking about this, but I thought it was a really good point. It could be Jessica Lanyadoo, could be Chani, could be Colin Bedell, could be any of the astrologers that I follow and adore. But they were speaking to the Saturn handoff house and the importance of recognizing how you specifically handled COVID and the social distancing and the masks. And then I want to add in there how you handled your responsibility as a member of the collective society and how you navigate depend like how do you handle being part of a larger system of humans, right? So when we think about COVID, we were asked as humans to wear masks to take care of other humans, and that was Saturn. That was one of the main themes of Saturn and Aquarius. So Pluto's about to move in there, right, to then finish up what we've already seen as a collective. So your individual story with how you handled the last 3 months through identify what Pluto may be bringing forward. I don't know if that was helpful. But I think we've talked enough about that for now, because I got more to say about Pluto and Saturn and Pisces. So we'll hold there. But any questions, comments, concerns, always feel free to share. Okay, so the other main big point that I see when I look at the chart is this Aries Pisces stuff happening. So we have Aries, which is fire, outward, like yang energy, and then we have Pisces, which is internal, yin energy, watery. Very different energies, right? And both of them are here and they are strong. So you're going to see them both play out in different situations in your life, but it's also going to depend on what you're more comfortable leaning into. And the Aries stuff with last week, it's Venus, Jupiter, and Chiron moving through the Aries part of your house. This is understanding your relationship to values, your relationships in general. This is a good time to recognize any wounds around relation, finances, resources, gender, any kind of your gender exploration experience. This is a good time to recognize your values and your beauty, and also anger, right? So all of these themes really coming up with that triple conjunction with Jupiter, Chiron, and Venus. I don't know if I said this, but it's your wounds, Chiron, the way you relate to Venus, and the things you believe about Jupiter, and then all of those like archetypal energies, finances, gender, anger, resources, money, yeah, connection, relationships, etc., etc. So that stuff is going to have you wanting to do something about it, right? Like Aries wants to do something about it, especially because there is this Mars situation starting to play out as well. So Mars is also activated. We'll get into the Mars stuff. This Aries stuff is going to want to express. It's going to want to do. Aries wants to do something. But this Pisces energy really asks us to hold on. It waits for us to do the internal kind of emotional work before moving forward. And this tension with the moon then allows us to recognize and discern, right? So a lot of times Virgo gets talked about being very critical. It's discern what is good for me and what is not good for me, or what is in alignment and what is not in alignment. So this Virgo full moon allows us to discern what is worth acting on and where we need to step back and do the internal work. Pisces versus Aries. They're the bookends of the zodiac, right? And this full moon really allows us to illuminate which things are worth speaking, finding grace and compassion, and maybe turning inward to do some of your own work around. This full moon really helps figure out the difference, the facts, the details of those situations that are playing out. The Pisces stuff can get pretty messy. Pisces has no bounds. It knows no boundaries. It's also super dreamy and super creative. So as we have these planets starting to get closer to Neptune, foggier, things get dreamier, things get more creative and imaginative, and that can be great. It can also be not great if we have to be in reality. And it can make us insecure. It can make us lonely. It can make us feel lost, which plays into the loneliness and the insecurity. It can make us be paranoid. All of be present. So just notice and make note of the importance of boundaries when we talk about Neptune, when we talk about Pisces, because sometimes we can get lost in all of that water. And as Saturn is now in Pisces, it's really important to get bumpers and boundaries around that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this gets messy because this stuff happening in Pisces sets off the third square to Mars. Since Mars has been in its Gemini stuff. And this will be the third one. It happens, I think, exact on the 14th. A week from today. But this full moon kicks off this square energy. So Mars square Neptune, again, super creative, super dreamy, but also exhausting and super confusing, not sure what is real, how to act, etc. It honestly can, like I wrote in my notes, it's an entire projection field of a clusterfuck because you can't tell what's real. So next week, I would hold back from watching the media. I think there could be a lot of stuff that comes out where we don't know all the details. We don't know. I mean, that's media, right? Like that's been a lot of this Neptune Mars square since August 2022 has really ramped up. There's stuff that the media just isn't showing. They're just not. And, so I think that will come up again as this Mars Neptune final square gets closer over this week. But it's a Virgo moon. So Virgo moons are always, always good for things like cleaning and organizing and getting your shit together in some way or another. It's good for figuring out what the next step is going to be, right? We talked about discerning. The of Virgo can really be illuminating under a full moon. Full moons illuminate the discernment that we have needed to recognize what our next step can be. Virgo doesn't want to take a bite out of the whole process. It wants the details. What's the next step to take? That could be illuminated under this moon. This is also a really good full moon to be of service. Virgo loves to be of service to others. Be of service. This is a good moon to be of service in ways that also support your health, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and your needs and your boundaries. So maybe just navigating what that would look like then. How could I be of service in ways that are also within alignment and healthy for me? Am I doing that? Am I not doing that? Right? Maybe this is the illumination period that you're like, oh shit, I'm in service a lot and it's never in ways that are healthy for me. Right? And so be full moon. There's your illumination. But there's all kinds of ways this can show up. If you don't know where to start, take a shower, right? Like cleanse your physical body, meditate, cleanse your mind, take a walk, get into nature. Virgo loves nature. Clean up your garden, cuddle with a dog. Virgo rules pets and animals. Sometimes ways to connect with this energy. And then obviously you can layer on from there what planets you have in Virgo, what planets you have around 16 degrees of mutable signs. All of that can help you layer on specific rituals and things to do. But if nothing else, just stick to the archetypes of full moon and Virgo, and that will give you a ton of stuff to utilize during any moon. Okay. Pause, because that was a lot of full moon Virgo stuff. Now we're going to move into Saturn and Pisces, but I'm going to pause for a beverage and feel free to dip into the comments live or on the replay. Okay, give me just a second to switch stuff out and I'll be right back. Okay. So now we have the clock chart up. So this is the chart of the day, 7th. Other big thing we have today is Saturn. So Saturn is now in Pisces. You can see it up here, 0 degrees, 0 minutes at Pisces. Yay. So again, the very generic, congratulations to Saturn and Aquarius folks, and welcome to your Saturn return for Saturn and Pisces folks. But just so you know, the way that I track a Saturn return isn't by sign. I mean, I do. I recognize that when Saturn moves into sign, it's very important, period. But I use a 7-degree orb for the actual Saturn return, which would be 3 degrees one way and 3 degrees the other way. That is your actual Saturn return in my study and in my experience. The rest of it is also super important. So there's like layers to it. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I can go into it deeper, but I don't know if anybody's interested or cares. Okay, so Saturn is in Pisces from now, today, until February 2026. So we have 3 years of Saturn navigating your Pisces house. So similar to how we just were talking about how Saturn dealt how you dealt with or what you learned from or what the themes were with Saturn and Aquarius the last 3 years. In 2026, I'm going to ask you the same thing. So today you get to start with me being, hey, like recognize if anything comes up. What comes up today? As Saturn dips into your Pisces house, what does that look like? If you don't use whole sign houses, then maybe it didn't dip into a new house. That'll be different. But here on this channel, publicly and generally, I use whole sign houses. So it's moved into a new house. So what is that? What are those themes, right? And maybe you're just noticing here. We're at the very, very beginning. But noticing now in your Pisces house. This is going to be felt most by people that have a lot of mutable energy, specifically between about 0 degrees and 3 degrees, 4 degrees of mutable signs. Mutable signs, again, are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And you know, yeah, you'll be feeling it if you know, you have early degree mutable placements in some way. If Saturn is your chart ruler, you'll also be feeling it. If Saturn is your Lord of the Year, you're also going to be feeling it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can recognize that Saturn is doing something pretty significant, right? This is the first time it's in a new sign in 3 years. That's significant. And so this year, though, it's only going to be in the first decan, which means the first 10 degrees of the sign. So it's only going to get to 7 degrees of Pisces, and then it's going to go retrograde back, and it's going to go back all the way to where it is today at 0 degrees of Pisces, and then it's going to station and it's going to go direct again. That's this year's story of Saturn in Pisces. So if you don't have anything mutable until like 24 degrees, you're good. Like Saturn isn't close to you yet. It is in the house, right? So you've heard Saturn open the door, the doorbell went off maybe, like, oh, Saturn's here, yet. Now, if you have, your sun at 1 degree of Pisces, yep, Saturn's there. Hey, Saturn's here in my room, in my house, on my bed. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be felt. And yeah. So considering what house Saturn governs in your chart, and also where your Pisces house is, right? What things you have at mutable, 0 degrees to 10 degrees, will help you understand patterns and cycles and themes that come up with Saturn over this next year. So Saturn likes to consolidate. It likes to slow down, restructure, mature. It's going to shift the responsibilities within that house, right? That's what Saturn does. And so for me, I have Saturn now. Pisces is my 3rd whole house. And so Saturn is my 3rd house. So I can recognize, and I've already felt it, right? So I have already been feeling the themes of Saturn coming up. The 3rd house is community. I have done nothing the last week except talk about how to build a community space. It's taken up my entire conversations. And so Saturn into my 3rd house, I know, will help me shift the responsibilities, pick up what's mine and put down what's not, and restructure and build structures and systems for a community space that feels good and aligned for me. I know that's going to be part of what Saturn is doing in my 3rd house of Pisces, and probably a lot of other things. But we can chat about it, workshop it, etc. But today is the first day that Saturn moves into Pisces. Some of the highlights of the stuff that I want to say generally about Saturn and Pisces, they don't necessarily go together. Saturn is structures. It is the boundaries. Like Saturn has the rings. It at one time was the boundary of what we thought the sky was, right? Like before we had telescopes, we thought that Saturn was as far as the universe existed because that's as far as we could see. Saturn holds the boundary. Pisces has no boundaries. So when Saturn is in Pisces, it's really a struggle of boundaries. Boundaries are going to be a big common thing that come up with Saturn in Pisces. Saturn knows no bounds on what reality would be. So this is a time over the next 3 years where a lot of people are going to be questioning what is reality. They're going to question what they believe to be true, right? And that can be hard. It can be jolting. And it can be very overwhelming. And so this time really invites you to put up, well, I'm not even going to say put up the bumpers. I'm going to say where you're in the boundless waters of the sea god, Neptune, of Pisces, right? Like it's water, which is great, but it's the sea, which can be terrifying. And so it's important to have your floaties and ask for support, right? Saturn is very, very big on owning where you need help and guidance and support systems in place. And it can be really heavy. Saturn, right? Saturn brings weight to a situation. And consider Pisces, right? We're back in the ocean, right? Hanging out, floating in the ocean. We got our floaties on. Saturn comes with a big old heaping stack of rocks and stones, and it throws that on you. And so here you are in this ocean with no boundaries and a big old pile of rocks sitting on you, right? So if you don't have floaties, that can be very difficult to navigate. And so we talk about mental health here. It's very important in my experience. And so I think it's very important to recognize that Saturn in Pisces, I love Pisces, but I am not here to pretend like it might not be difficult. Like I'm not here to pretend like it's going to be great. There's going to be a lot of heaviness, and it can be very overwhelming emotionally and spiritually. When we hit those moments where we're like, wait, everything I thought that real is not real, that is a huge jolt, right? And so just putting up those boundaries. Now, a lot of us have already moved through that. A lot of us have been hitting those things. So it might get heavy, but it's not something that we haven't dealt with before. But the people around you that maybe haven't dug into the shadow work yet, maybe they haven't been doing this work yet, maybe they get that jolt and they're not sure. And maybe you are the Saturn that comes in and some tools and some support for you, because I know that that is really heavy and this is really hard and you probably feel very lost and lonely, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe you're the Saturn, maybe you're the Pisces, maybe you're none of it. Maybe you're all of it. I don't know, but we got 3 years to play around with it. So the other thing that I would say is Saturn wants to make the supportive structures to hold the weight. So Pisces likes to sometimes, so it likes to escape from the hard things, or just the things that it doesn't resonate with or doesn't want to deal with. Saturn does not want you to avoid. So Saturn in Pisces is not asking you to avoid, to disassociate, to escape from reality. It'll be very easy with Pisces. It's very easy in the Pisces water to just disassociate and just float, right? But it's important for Saturn's placement there to recognize what your responsibility and feel it, hold it, and move through it, not avoid it, not escape it. That's how you work with Saturn in any sign. But as we're talking about Pisces, that's how you deal with these kind of treacherous waters, is to take the responsibility of what's yours and only what's yours, because boundaries are important, and build structures that help support you in navigating that watery terrain. So that's going to look a lot different depending on how your chart is. Like if the Pisces water, you might be like, yeah, I'm in for it. Or you might be like, no, I'm not in for it. I've had enough of this watery stuff. I don't need Saturn coming through. If you don't have any water, it may feel very uncomfortable. Or maybe you're like, wow, I really needed to feel these emotions. It feels great to let them go. So ton of different ways that we can experience this energy, as with everything. So consider what house Pisces is in your chart, or if you don't use whole sign houses, what your deacon that Saturn's going to be moving through this year, and how maybe it can get consolidated or restructured or shifted to be more sturdy and more supportive in your experience. And obviously it can show up in a ton of ways, but I always like to plant little seeds around what I would like for it to look like, what I would like for Saturn to help. That way I'm co-creating in a deeper way with the planet. So take it or leave it. I won't be offended either way. Okay, that's the intro to Saturn in Pisces. A lot we can talk about. I'm sure there are questions. Feel free to drop them anywhere and we'll chat about it. Again, March 2023 to February 2026, Saturn in Pisces. All right. Get to the rest of the week. Okay. So we have, today is today, and we already talked about it. We got the moon in Virgo. Tomorrow, we still have the moon finishing out Virgo. Then it goes into Libra. We're really still just feeling everything that I talked about already. We're going to be at this the moon finishing through Libra. On Thursday, the moon will hit oppositions to those planets in Aries. So there may be a kick up of some of that Aries stuff, more specifically, that we've been working through. And that's leading to that Jupiter Chiron conjunction that happens on the 11th, right? So the moon kind of reactivates that Aries stuff. And then the following day, it hits a square to Pluto, which noting that. And then we get to the following day, Saturday, March 11th, which is just cute, jam-packed. So, what I wanted to show you is today, okay, so if we're looking at the chart on the screen, look at the lines in the middle, the aspect lines. I wanted to show you, so we start the week with, we start the week. And what we're watching is these red lines, the thickness, we're going to watch them get thicker as those squares get closer. I just think it's cool to see. So here's tomorrow, and we can already see the red is getting thicker, the blue has gotten thinner. And then we go, see, so now we're thicker again here, and we see Mars and Venus, the thick blue line, and then we go one more day. Okay, and then this is the 11th, and see how thick they are. This is exact aspects. So we have all three of them on this day, which is pretty cool and pretty wild. So we have moon in Scorpio. So can feel a little bit of like a dip into the emotional depths with moon and Scorpio anytime. It's connecting with the south node, so a good time to anything that feels heavy, right? Even if it's just a moment to breathe and release anything that doesn't serve us. Always a good time when we have south node or Scorpio transits happening. Okay, so let's break down these transits a little bit more in depth. So we have on Saturday, the 11th, the first one we have is Venus sextile Mars. So again, a sextile is when they're 60 degrees apart. A sextile is, it's the besties, like we're gonna have a good time, it's fun, it's flowing energy. Venus and Mars, they're the cosmic lovers. This can get spicy, it can get playful, romantic, fun. It's a good time to be creative, to do something with our desires. It's a good time to socialize and connect with people. Just a really fun kind of energy. We also have another fun sextile energy happening between Mercury at 15 degrees Pisces and Uranus at 15 degrees of Taurus. And that again is fun. It's surprising, exciting news. It's opening your mind. It's dynamic conversations and exchanges, exciting new understandings of something, spontaneous. It's fun. And so again, you're going to be feeling this if you have 15 degrees, anything aspecting 15 Mercury Uranus is. If you have anything at 23 degrees aspecting Aries and Gemini, you're going to be feeling that Mars Venus sextile. And then the third thing that we have overlapping on this day is the conjunction between Chiron and Jupiter at 14 degrees of Aries. And this calls us back again to that conversation, the Aries stuff that we had. Jupiter and Aries come together every 17 years, so it's not super common. And when they come together, it's Jupiter, the expander, and Chiron, our wounds, and the teacher. Both Chiron and Jupiter are teachers in archetypal astrology. And so this is a good time to look for a trusted teacher that can help guide you in some sort of healing or expansion. This is also a good time to reach out to a healer or teacher that you had in the past that has been pivotal in your experience. Just give them a little bit of love or kindness. Venus is still there and available, in Aries as well. And this can also be looking to the self as a trusted teacher. It's an Aries at the end of the day. So that's that independence around our own experience. But this allows our kind of understandings of things, our perspective to expand, receive some sort of healing. That's Jupiter Chiron conjunct. It can be super ouchy. Like if you have a planet directly at 14 degrees of Aries, this can bring up something pretty traumatic in your experience. But with Jupiter there is definitely opportunity for repair and some kind of growth around whatever that wound is. It comes up that you feel like you need support around, I'm always honored to hold space or workshop anything with you here on Patreon. So that's the big hits of the week. But as you see, so we have these cute little blue heavy aspects. And as we get closer, so this is Saturday, then we move to Sunday and Monday, and look at those red lines. So we can see that square really ties up with these Pisces planets all very close together. And this happens on Tuesday. So this is what we're going to talk about next week, this clusterfuck of mess that happens next week. But I think it's cool that we can see this week, like we have these sextiles. This is really supportive, these blue ones, to give us a little bit of joy, a little bit of fun, a little bit of support around some of the astrology shifting. So if it's available to lean into some of this fun over the weekend, I would invite you to do so. If it doesn't feel accessible, there's a lot of internal energy here to do any kind of self-care that feels relevant and feels like it's coming up to be honored. You could go either way with the energy this week. So really tapping into what feels accessible and what is yearning to be held in your experience this week. Between those two, that fiery Aries, let's do something energy, and that internal Pisces. And again, that full moon really helping you discern which one is best for you in each moment, because it can be different, right? Today it might be one, and tomorrow it might be another. So yeah. Okay. So that happens, and then we have the moon moving through Scorpio, then it's into Sagittarius on Moon Day on Monday, and that's the day before we meet again. And you can still see Chiron and Jupiter still very close. They stay together at 14 degrees until Tuesday, midday Tuesday actually. So it's a long couple day transit that we'll be feeling, but it heats up with these squares to. All right, let me give you next week and all of these squares before we go, because it is a lot. I've already talked about really the main thing around it, and it's that it's messy, it's dramatic. Mars is unhinged. It's ready to be out of Gemini. It's ready to go. It's ready to be heard and understood. And it's unhinged. And so it can be very dramatic, whether that's us being dramatic or the people, but it can be a lot. And so the invitation for next week that we'll go into more is around assertion versus aggression, right? And this full moon this week helps us with the discernment of when we need to Aries act and when we need to turn inward, Pisces. And that's going to be ever helpful next week when we have this Mars squaring all of that Pisces stuff. So, all right. So that's the quick and questions, comments, concerns, feel free to hop off mic, chat in the chat, on the comments, in the messages, etc. And I am going to prep for the tarot card of the week. I was honored, blessed, humbled by the gift that I received for my day of birth. I expected nothing and was very overwhelmed and grateful to the community that I built and that all of you take part in. And I'm just honored to be here. So part of those gifts was this queer tarot deck from Curtis and our friends here that we're working with. And we're going to use that deck today. I love it. All of the cards have actual queer and trans folks on them. And each of, in the book, they have all of them like listed, who each of the models are, and they use this super groovy like color scheme, and they people that are into digital and design more than me will probably know, but they did this thing where they overlay the colors. I don't know, it's cool. Anyway, I like them. So we're gonna chat today and see what comes up for the week ahead for the folks on my Patreon specifically that are here live and those that will watch on the replay. The guidance for and as always, I invite you to take the time and space you need to provide yourself the ability to receive any messages that come forward today. I'll leave you with the card to note and notice anything that comes up for you organically, intuitively. Those messages are so important. What resonates, what doesn't resonate. If you have resistance to this process, generally, all of it's important to notice. You get the Queen of Pentacles card. Just notice anything comes up to you intuitively or organically as you look at the picture, as you consider the card. It can relate to what we've discussed here or not at all. And I will post a picture of this card with some of my own thoughts that come up around it that may or may not match what come up for you, which is totally okay. Multiple messages available for us at to be here with you. I appreciate you, and we will chat soon.